Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us for episode 38 of Cage Side Convos. My name is Rick Huntsman.
And this is Quince. What's good?
And we're coming to you guys live from American Top Team here in Watertown. So this week, we're going to talk a little bit about being resilient and what the difference between being resilient and being stubborn is, and how kind of often one can lead to the other and then back to the other. You know, how it ends up being kind of a cyclical relationship.
Right. You know, and I like this topic because I think on the surface, resiliency and stubbornness almost seem like the same thing. You know, as far as, you know, standing your ground or being of conviction, and you know, knowing what you think you might want out of life or a situation. So what we're going to do is we're going to start off by breaking down the actual definition. We'll start with resiliency first. Resiliency is the capacity to bounce back, to work against, what's that called? Restriction, or I'm trying to think. It's another R word. I didn't write it down. But when something will restrain, but kind of going against the grain. We'll keep it like that. Going against the grain.
Try to improvise too soon.
Yeah. But it's the capacity to bounce back from difficulty, and it kind of defines toughness in general. While stubbornness, it says, I'm reading this one directly.
Sure.
Stubbornness is determination not to change one's attitude or position on something. So I think when breaking it down, the obvious differences are, I think, your willingness or ability to learn or adapt to a situation, rather than just kind of stay your own lane.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right. Yeah, for sure. And I think I think when you look at someone, when you observe someone, I think it's probably a little bit easier to differentiate between resiliency and stubbornness. I think someone who's resilient has kind of a yes and mindset.
Mm-hmm.
So being more accepting of what's going on around them. You know, like,
Right.
Okay, this is going on, and this is what I'm going to do in reaction to that. I think someone who's stubborn has more of a no mindset.
Right.
All right, these are the facts. No. Well, this is the situation. No, this is the way we're doing it. Kind of that's the my way or the highway kind of person.
Right.
You know?
Right.
But I think when it comes to ourselves, I think that's where it's easy to kind of, what's the word, conflate, where you mix the meanings together, confuse the meanings internally. Because part of being resilient, yes, it's adapting to the situation at hand, but it's still working towards the goal, you know? So sometimes, you know, internally when we have a goal, like, okay, this is where I want to go.
Mm-hmm.
And to a certain extent, to be successful in your goals, like we talked about before, it kind of doesn't matter what happens around you.
Right.
You know, so that's where it gets a little confusing, is because to a certain extent, to be successful, you have to neglect what's going on. So you have to be a little bit stubborn. But at what point are you resilient? What point are you stubborn? You know? And for me, I think where I settled on making the differentiation when examining myself is, I think resiliency leads to forward progress,
Mm-hmm.
and stubbornness leads to standing still.
Yeah, very, very stagnant. And
Yeah.
You made a great point as far as goals and goal setting, because what is the ultimate goal? If your ultimate goal in a conversation is to be right, you know, if you just want to be right and the other person is wrong, so no matter what that person says, they're going to be wrong.
Right.
Or you're going to find something
right.
wrong with it. And no matter what you say and what you know as is right. To me, that's what stubbornness is.
Sure.
You know,
Yeah.
if the goal is not for something larger than self, for current understanding, that's what stubbornness is.
Sure.
I think resiliency is the ability to have a goal or understanding that you are after the truer perspective, the truer position.
Right.
And so that leaves you open to a better understanding. That leads you open to a little more insight. So even if your purpose is this higher point, and that's where you're trying to go. I can listen. I can listen to how you get there.
Right.
You know what I mean? I can learn from that.
Right.
And I have the flexibility to be wrong.
Right.
So you might say something that I didn't think of before.
Right.
And it changes my perception
Right.
and how I see something. But now I'm still coming back around and pushing through my
Yeah.
wrongness.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
In order to still obtain that higher goal or that higher perspective.
Sure. Yeah. So it almost ends up being like a scientific method, right? So if we're stubborn, then we try to bend the facts to fit the hypothesis. If we're resilient, we adjust our hypothesis to fit the facts, right? So, but if my goal is, so I guess it's our path, right? A stubborn person has a linear path, whereas a resilient person has a winding path, right?
Okay.
When so almost sometimes facts can be obstacles, because if we didn't understand something from a certain perspective, or if we didn't understand something to be true, now we have to change where our path is going. We can still get to that goal, but I think that's the resiliency, is the ability to rebound
Right.
from that. Like you said, the ability to be wrong. A resilient person has the ability to be wrong and adjust accordingly. Because when we're wrong, we just have to make a turn. We
Right.
can still get there,
Right.
but we have to figure out a new way to do it. Whereas a stubborn person would just sit there and keep slamming into that roadblock and say,
Absolutely.
no, I'm right,
Right.
and then ultimately never reach that goal, I think.
Yeah, I think a good example is, even our day-to-day relationships, maybe with our significant other. When we get into these arguments, what is, of course, everybody wants to be right in these arguments, and sometimes that's their only goal, is to be right.
Right.
So, what happens? People don't change their position. People don't listen. People might speak louder and speak over top. And some might even come to, threats or, antagonistic.
Yeah.
You know what I
name
mean?
calling,
Abuse.
Yeah. Yep.
And ultimately, just like you said, there's no forward progression. There's
Right.
no true communication in that.
Right.
Once again, if I am there for the right reason, it's
Yeah.
nothing for me to be wrong.
Sure.
Trying to obtain that truth, that right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, absolutely.
you know what it was? It was resistance. The word was resistance.
Resistance.
But
yeah.
moving through resistance.
Sure.
And being able to maneuver that. I
Yeah.
think that was the other R word.
And yeah, I mean, that's the thing though, is that it's very difficult, I think, sometimes to know. Again, are we moving through resistance? Is our path just? If we're on the goal towards a purpose, then we can withstand a lot, and you have to withstand a lot. But at a certain point, we're walking through the rain.
Yeah.
If we're being resilient, we're walking through the rain, we're getting pelted, head down, and we're still moving forward. If we're being stubborn, we're just standing there saying, this rain isn't going to bother me.
Right. Right.
But if you're not moving, it's not only are you not progressing, but you're going backwards.
Sure.
So if you're stubborn, and if you refuse to move, if you refuse to change, you refuse to bend,
Right.
you're moving backwards. If being resilient, I think, again, for me, it keeps coming back to that notion of, am I making progress?
Sure.
And like you said, with a conversation, especially with a significant other, a close friend, and it always seems that the conversations get most heated with those that are closest to us. But if the goal is, what's the agreed upon goal? Okay, we want to know what the truth is in this matter that we're discussing, or do I want to be right?
Sure.
And if the goal is I want to be right, then we're both being stubborn, and there's no point even having the conversation. But the resiliency comes in with saying, okay, we both agree, we want to know what the truth is, we want to gain a better understanding of one another, so I don't care if I'm right or not, because we both have the same shared goal. We've talked about that before in various different manifestations, but it's interesting to see how observing this through the lens of resiliency, it comes back, because as long as we're, okay, yes, I can say I'm sorry, because that pushes us forward.
Sure.
I become resilient by allowing myself to bend or break, but recover.
Yeah.
And then we recover together, and you go together, and that's how you forge connection. That's how you forge community. That's how you build a greater purpose. So a lot of merits to understanding what resiliency actually means, and keeping an eye on, okay, well, I'm just being stubborn right now. I need
Right.
to allow myself to bend a little bit.
Right,
to-
or
to
I'm just
keep
or I'm
moving
just
forward.
feeling hurt right now, or maybe I'm
Yeah,
embarrassed, or
yeah,
whatever it is that
yeah,
might put
yeah.
you back in that little shell,
Sure.
that protective shell of the ego. But
Sure.
I think before we move on to that, it's important to understand which one you're being, because sometimes you might think you're being resistant, but really you're just being stubborn.
Yeah.
You know what I
Sure,
mean, or
sure.
vice versa. So I was thinking a little bit about how to figure out which one I'm taking part in, and I think it all has to do with reassessing the situation. Personal assessments, reassessing goals,
Sure.
and reassessing approach. So if you're in a position and you've been working for a certain goal for a certain amount of time, and you see other things start to fall apart because of it, whether it's home life, whether it's financials, whether it's physical health, are you being resilient because you're continuing on with this goal, or are you being stubborn?
Right.
Does the outcome of the goal not give back to the output of what you're
Yeah.
putting out to get to that goal?
Yeah.
So to me, in my mind, what would you say? That's
Something that pops to mind with this. I heard Coach Trevor Whitman say, Trevor Whitman's world-class coach. I think he's coached some 18 or 19 people to world championships, whether it be in boxing or MMA.
Mm-hmm.
And I was listening to what he was talking about, champion mindset, like what it means to be a champion. And one of the things that he said that resonates with me pretty frequently, and eventually, once I get around to it, I'll tie back into what you were saying, is once you get to that goal, is nothing changes. So understanding it in the context of what you're talking about, if things are falling to the wayside, if your relationships are deteriorating, if your home life is deteriorating, if your health is deteriorating, all for the sake of getting to that goal. So for a cliche kind of thing, your goal is to be CEO of this big company, right? If you think that when you get to that goal that your life is going to change, it's not. So once you get there, all that's going to change is the fact that you can say, okay, I did this. I've become a CEO, I've become world champion, I've become a millionaire, right? But just because you check that box, everything around you that's in shambles isn't going to change. It's not going to fix. It's not going to get better just because you got to this goal,
Right.
And I think that's something that's very important to keep in mind. It's just because you check that box doesn't mean things change. So then it becomes a matter of, okay, am I being resilient because this goal means a lot to me, and my life is still going to be great once I get to that goal, or are you forsaking everything in a very stubborn and a very linear mindset to just get to this goal?
Yeah.
And you hear always the cliche of people with money are lonely.
Lonely at the top.
Yeah, exactly. Millionaires are lonely. Steve Jobs was supposedly miserable when he died, because he had nobody, because he was so stubborn and so laser focused on this one goal. And then, he got there and nothing changed.
Right.
So I think that's one of the most profound things for me lately has been understanding that, okay, whatever your goal is just a byproduct of living a happy life.
Sure.
And I think that maybe that would be what I define as more resiliency. Is my goal is a byproduct of what I'm already doing.
Okay. Right.
So kind of how I approach martial arts. Eventually I'll be a black belt in jiu-jitsu. Eventually I'll be a black belt in Bang Muay Thai system. Eventually, but those are cool little goals to mark off. But nothing's going to change once I get my black belt.
Right.
Nothing. I'm a purple belt in jiu-jitsu right now. Nothing's going to change when I get my brown belt. Nothing's going to change when I get my black belt. In 50 years, and I get my coral belt in jiu-jitsu, nothing's going to change. But so you can't be entirely focused on that goal. You have to understand it holistically. Is the goal is a byproduct of the hard work and the life that I built around that.
That's exactly what I was going to say. We've talked about this several times about that goal. Obtaining that goal itself doesn't do anything for you, but it's that work. It's every day getting up, keeping you, the rest of your life in balance, in tune, keeping your health up, keeping your money up, keeping your family up, things like that. And continuing that forward progress is what helps you to be a better individual day after day, better at what you do. The goal itself is really just it's not even an ending point.
Yeah.
It's certainly not an ending point.
Right. Well, yeah, exactly. And if the goal is the end point, what's past that? What are you going to do next? Because that means that you have this notion that things are going to change once you hit that goal. That's it. That's the end of the story.
Right.
My only end of the story goal in my life is to die. That's it. That's it. That is my end goal, is to just be dead.
Yeah.
So, and that's it, because that's when nothing else changes.
I think you'll accomplish that.
I've got the utmost faith. That's a goal I've never worried about, But, and again, I can only hope that coincides with the rest of my goals. It's just a byproduct of a happy life.
Yeah.
And I think, we've talked about this before, probably 4 or 5 times in various different conversations as well. Is that your goals are your trail markers that tell you you're on your way to your purpose.
Sure.
And my purpose has been defined to myself for years of enriching other people's lives.
Yeah.
And we actually talked a little bit about this. We talked before we talked about this. My focus has kind of been shifted to more of a national and global scale lately, and kind of forgetting that I can't do anything about the world. All I can do is affect my community.
Right.
So which I think has led me to becoming very stubborn, and I get very frustrated, and I get very angry.
And dealing with the larger
aspect when I get on
world.
Facebook and I see people being assholes to each other and people being so myopic. People are talking or having a global discussion and they're only worried about what's right here.
Sure.
And again, that's completely stubborn for me, because now I'm not moving forward.
Right.
I'm not being resilient. I'm just being, why won't you people listen? Why won't you people be kind to each other? But the resiliency comes back to me saying, okay, right, I can only affect what's right here. And that's what everybody's trying to do. And everybody is looking at the world, from 6 inches in front of their face, and trying to apply that to a situation that it doesn't apply to.
Sure.
And then I forget about things like this, about having conversations, about what's going on locally. How are my friends doing? How's my family doing? What's my backyard look like? And I forget about the impact that I can have from that point.
Right.
And then it's interesting, man, because a week and a half ago, it was last Monday, I think, I shot you the idea for this topic, and it was only this very morning that I realized how much I needed this conversation.
Yeah.
To reshift my focus. Again, kind of what I touched on at the beginning, it's a little cyclical, because I was trying to be resilient, and then I got to a point where I was standing still and I didn't even realize it until we started talking.
Right. And even this morning when I was scratching down, the definitions or my own personal breakdown of it, it wasn't until just like my past started opening up, as far as when I had maybe been a little more stubborn, or times where my resiliency had helped me pull myself out of the bullshit. And not just the past, but like in current, now, like every day, daily operations, the ongoing conversations I'm having, the certain way that I, structure my life. Am I being stubborn? Am I being resilient? And like I said, at the very start of this, man, I didn't even know I needed it. I didn't even know I needed it. And, you said something important about the goals, the goal setting itself, and about it being the journey there, and why goals are important. Well, I think goals are important to help us build that structure, and that structure then leads us into the behavior. You know what I mean? To help shape that behavior, and that's the goal of the goal almost. You know what I mean? To learn and move from that behavior. So, there are points and times in life in which you don't necessarily, you might not align with the goal that you had set anymore. Things change, maybe additions to family or subtractions or, changing jobs. But now, do you stick with these goals because that's the goal you had and you want to be resilient, or so you think? Or do you reassess the situation and the understanding of why you are a part of something, exactly like you said, and take a step back and adjust your perception and then keep moving forward, which is the true resiliency.
Absolutely. It's interesting to me because we talked a while ago about discipline and very specifically emotional discipline. And I think that goals, as much as we would love to say we're very calculated and very logical when we set a goal, I think that our goals always have an emotional hue to them. I think when we set a goal, I think there's some emotion to it. I think there's some motivation to it, you know, and we talked about the difference between motivation and discipline, you know, and it's easy when you're very wound up, when you're very excited about something, you're very emotional about something, you set a goal for yourself, right? And goals, we have short-term goals, right, which could be, what's my goal for this minute, or this hour, or this day, or this week, or this month, you know?
Right.
Short-term goals.
Resistance.
Yeah. So, yeah. I will be resilient. I'll eventually say short-term correctly.
There it is.
But then, you know, we have long-term goals and we have lifelong goals, right? And if we set a lifelong goal, you know, what's the last box I want to check before I die? You know, if that's a lifelong goal, if you set that when you're emotionally charged, you have to understand that your emotions will change and your feelings will change. And if you're, I actually heard, I was listening to John Danaher give an interview, and for those of you who don't know, John Danaher is a very prominent name in the jiu-jitsu scene. He's trained a lot of world champion guys and stuff. But something he said was that, and I found it fascinating. Actually, I think I sent it to you. He talked about if you change one thing every day, right? And if you have something from each day that you carry to the next day, it doesn't have to be the same thing every day, but you know, so Monday, this is what happened, I carried this into Tuesday. Tuesday, I carried this into Wednesday. So each day you're building, you're growing. He said that effectively you could change yourself every 5 years. You could completely reinvent yourself every 5 years or so. That being said, I found that fascinating because that's a little bit more analytical look at something that you and I talk about all the time, the constant growth and stuff. And I've never really examined it in terms of reinventing ourselves. But if we do that, if we're doing all this stuff that you and I talk about, if we're making these changes every day, if we're progressing every day, we're changing and we're evolving constantly. And as such, our emotions change, our emotional climate changes, our feeling changes, right? Our aura changes, however you understand that. So your lifelong goal inevitably could change every 5 to 10 to 15 years or whatever.
Sure.
You know, it could change all the time until you die because to a certain level it's emotionally charged. The resiliency comes in from understanding, okay, well, if that goal doesn't suit me anymore, like that was a noble goal for 20-year-old me, but 30-year-old me, maybe that's not who I am, maybe that's not how I feel anymore. And like you said, are you stubborn? And do you say, well, I said I was going to do this, so I'm going to do it regardless of the cost? Or do you say, okay, well, I have to check my ego. I have to set that down and understand what's going to be best for me, for my family, for my community, you know, lifelong.
100%. And, you know, and it sounds very similar to the conversation we just had about, you know, some of the differences between passion and purpose.
Sure.
You know, that passion being very, very emotionally charged and being a place in which oftentimes, one starts from and gets that initial jump. And sometimes you do got to be stubborn, a little hard-headed, you know, in your pursuit, you know, until eventually, you know, you'll learn what you need to learn along the way. You know, but that brings you into a bigger understanding of maybe purpose or maybe what resiliency actually means. You know, and so there's that also the needed assessment of approach to what you're doing. You know, once you go through your goal assessment, you go through your approach assessment, and that again you're dealing with the ego. You know, this ego oftentimes it can help us out in situations, but oftentimes we find it gets in our way, kind of boxes us into who we think we are in our just current understandings, but
who we think we have to be.
Or have to be. Good point. But you know, going toward a goal that you haven't accomplished yet, and you're thinking about your approach to it, and have you really been giving your all? Like you said, do we really do the things that we sit here and talk about? You know, every couple of weeks. You know, sometimes no. You know, being honest, sometimes no. Other times, you know, certainly. But it's about being honest with with yourself and
Yeah.
being honest with that approach, because you know, if the goal is true, if the aim is true, there's nothing to adapting your technique, your routine, your approach, you know, and re-implementing yourself toward this goal.
Yeah, I like that. I like approach assessment.
Approach assessment.
Yeah. Let's see. So just kind of a metaphor off of that, your approach. So say you're doing, because you used to do like long jump and stuff like that in track, right?
High jump. Yeah.
High jump. Yeah. So one of these days I'll get it right. We've been friends for like 5 years, and I still every time I try to pull up something from the past, I'm like, yeah, this is. You're like, no, that was wrong. I'm like, yeah, okay, yeah. I swear to God, I listen when we talk. So when you're doing high jump, how important was your approach to the jump?
Oh, everything.
Yeah.
Everything is all in the approach.
Yeah, exactly. It's almost more important than the actual jump itself. It's just that sets everything up.
Sure, because the angle and the way the angle in which you come in is what is going to torque your body over the top. You know, the way in which you put your last foot down, the angle in which you put your last foot down is what's going to twist you in the air.
Right.
So, you know, physics takes over at that point. So, you know, sure, you practice your, you know, you get your jump rope on, you get your squats, you know, practice your strength and things like that. But it's all approach, it's all technique.
Yeah.
And naturally, I was able still to jump over quite a bit. And this was without any training whatsoever.
Yeah.
But with that training, with that approach change and understanding, you know, the numbers just skyrocketed.
That's awesome, man.
Yeah.
That's great. I think, and I mean, it ties back into the Stoic notion that the big metaphor from Stoicism is once you've let go of the arrow, it doesn't matter. You know, you do all your preparation beforehand, you approach correctly, and you do everything right, and then once you let go, once you jump, like you said, physics takes over, it's done. It doesn't matter. Something interesting, and I force myself to do this a lot, and I feel that it's helped me understand my ego and my tendency for my ego to try to chime in a conversation, especially when I feel challenged. So my approach to the conversation, I touched on this earlier, but what's the first word out of my mouth when somebody says something to me I don't like? And I analyze that a lot more now. And I found in situations where I would define myself as having been stubborn, the first word out of my mouth was no. And if the first word out of my mouth in a conversation is no, the whole conversation goes to shit because that's a bad approach.
Right.
But no matter how deplorable I think what that person said was, if I say okay, or if I say yes, or if I say okay, you know, at least at the bare minimum, let me try to understand that. Please keep going. What I found is that quells my emotions. I can still think the person's an asshole, and a lot of times I do, but it helps the conversation. I've actually managed to learn a lot more, and even people that, like I said, you can walk away from a discussion with someone and think they're a complete piece of shit, but at least understand that, okay, yeah, I definitely think they're a piece of shit. Instead of saying, no, you're just an asshole, and then shutting them down immediately and being stubborn, you can walk away and say, okay, well, my hypothesis was correct, and I have all this data to support it. But it's all in the approach.
Right.
You know? So I think that's interesting. And even, you know, every time I go back and try to analyze, you know, who I was in the past, how I've conducted myself, who I am now, where I see myself going, more and more and more it becomes necessary in my mind to say okay first, and wait and listen and intake, and it quells my emotions, and it helps me remember that I'm not right.
Right.
And I want to know what's right. I enjoy being right. It's a good feeling. I think you get an endorphin hit every time that you're correct.
Sure.
But I like to actually be right instead of just thinking I'm right, instead of just saying I'm right.
Right.
You know, and if the data comes back and I need to change how I feel or how I view the world, so be it. But I can be right next time.
Right.
You know, or I can be closer to being right next time.
And I think that speaks a lot on your relationship with your own personal ego.
Sure.
You know, because I think it's that ego that needs to be right.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But you're understanding that you want the ultimate right.
Sure.
You know, that ultimate truth.
Yeah.
And so, you know, certainly being a musician, being a rapper, I think ego is very much right in your face.
Yeah.
Right in your face.
Sure.
And even besides having other artists in which you might seem like you're in competition with. I've had ego situations with my own ego, just as far as my understanding of pop culture or pop music or shit that gets played on the radio.
Yeah.
I think for a long time I was like, I don't really fuck with what gets played on the radio. I don't listen to it. I never hear anything that I listen to on it, or I never, my music's not being played on the radio. So like, it's me. I'm like, I don't like the radio. I don't like what they do, and I find all these reasons to justify that. Until I took a step outside of myself and say, well, or ask myself those questions. Well, I'm comfortable in what I do, right? I've got an audience that I might speak to, but how do songs get on the radio? Why do they get to play? Why do they get that sort of attention? To understand more. And once I did, and without having to sacrifice what I do, now I can change my approach. I can learn to speak to different, people that might like different genres, or a certain kind of content. I can still speak my truth within any circumstance. And and once I understood that, radio was not the enemy. It was me. I was my own worst enemy. Because I just had a very, very narrow outlook on it. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So, and
it's
that was
interesting
all
how so for me, I think we always, try to translate stuff into language and we understand it better. The way I translate that story for me is you went from saying, no, like fuck all these guys, their shit's whack, they're not playing my stuff, to saying, you stopped and you said, okay. You said, okay, this is the truth. This is a fact. This is what's going on. Yes, this is happening, and what can I learn from it? And what can I do? And how can I change? And how can I be resilient in this situation? And it sounds like, ultimately you found a little bit of peace with it, and then you found productive steps that you could move forward. Stubborn, you were standing still. Your shit wasn't getting played on the radio when you were being stubborn.
Right.
Maybe your shit's not getting played on the radio right now, but you have more of a chance of that happening if you're moving forward, if you're branching out, if you're allowing yourself to grow. And that stubbornness and that ego, like I said, kept justifying it. We say, it's not my fault. It's their fault. Yes.
They don't know what's good for them.
Yes.
Which
is probably true.
Well, as it turns out. But and it doesn't mean that everything that I write or create has to be for the radio.
Right.
But I can still do whatever I want with my own understanding. But now all these walls, the walls to these boxes of the ego start dropping a little bit.
And not for nothing, man. Shit like that's cool.
Absolutely.
We recorded that song, Funk Mondays.
Funk Mondays.
And that,
Hated it.
You only hated the radio edit of it. But, it was, a super fun song to play. It was, we recorded it when, when the OCL Live kind of experiment was still very young. And it was cool as shit to hear that on the radio, man.
Absolutely.
It was cool as shit.
Absolutely. It was a great, sorry.
Well, yeah, but it doesn't mean it necessarily has to be, just everything panders for the radio and you're just trying to get famous and stuff. But man, I don't give a shit who you are. Seeing that or hearing that stuff on the radio is cool. Seeing what you do on TV is cool. Seeing it put on a national scale is cool, man. Even for me, like I'll go back and the last fight I had was televised. Well, not televised, but it was on a streaming service online. And it was like really well done, and there were announcers like analyzing the fight and stuff as we were going and shit. Shit like that's cool, man.
It is.
And to see yourself in some way or shape, like kind of on a bigger stage, on something that's bigger than yourself, it's cool. So having goals like that is not, you don't necessarily have to pander your whole life, but once in a while, shit like that's cool to do with your life.
For sure. For sure, and it just adds to your repertoire, adds to your resume. Who doesn't want to reach more people? Who doesn't want to reach more people in a way in which they are still true to themselves? Right. You know what I mean? Because certainly, I think that's where the term selling out comes from. Is trying to capture that audience at the expense of self or belief. And that's where it gets kind of skewed. And I think that was probably always my understanding of what pop culture was or radio. It was like, oh, everyone here has sold out.
Right.
No, maybe not. Maybe not everyone. You know, maybe certainly there are going to be individuals in which think they have the shit down to a science and get that sort of play, or might pay money to get that sort of recognition. But there are a large majority and growing majority of people that learn that, hey, what do I have to do to get my voice to reach the masses? Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah.
But
and again, it's sometimes the goals could just be a byproduct of a happy life, or sometimes people have a bucket list, and sometimes it's just cool to do shit to say that you did shit.
Exactly.
And then you don't have to make that who you are. It doesn't have to be the focus of your life, but sometimes it's nice to just do cool shit. Who we got? Alex Slurry, always ready to play music. No, Alex, we're not going backwards, man. It's because everybody's being stubborn. If you tuned in earlier in the conversation, we would have covered that. He said he's so ready to play music.
Yeah.
He's ready to get out there. And I mean, Alex, man, if anybody loves being out in the crowd, it's Alex Slurry for sure. He said, unfortunately, it looks like we're going backwards. And, I mean, there's only so much we can do. I mean.
Yeah.
Listen to the CDC, wear your mask, wash your hands, and just hope for the best.
And that'll be up to us. Whether or not we go backwards. That's up to us. All we can do is utilize the information they give us to the best of our abilities, and that once again is going to define whether we're being stubborn or being resilient. Like we were saying before, if you're not wearing a mask simply because someone is telling you to wear a mask. You're not being resilient. That's not tough. You know what I mean? It's just stubbornness. So to really, I don't know. I don't want to say you have to abide by all the rules just as rules go. But like, there's a certain level of understanding. Why are we going through the steps that we are? Why it might seem like we're taking steps back in time. And there's certain self-accountability that we all need for ourselves and others as well.
And I mean, it's one of the things we talked about in being resilient was accepting the facts that are presented to you. And what's crazy, and I get it. I understand why people are pissed off and why people are being stubborn about stuff right now, because it's so hard to find a consistent feed of facts.
Right.
And I mean, ultimately, if wearing a mask might help. Honestly, man, I'm fucking game for it right now. Going to a store, you go into a place. Like right now, we're definitely sitting 6 feet apart, so we don't have to worry about it. But stuff like that. If you're around a bunch of people and it's what you have, if it might help, cool. If that's being resilient, cool. But it's hard right now because we've been, like we talked about before. Everybody up here has been being super resilient since March.
Right.
It's getting 4 months. Everybody's been resilient and been thinking that we're moving forward, and then all of a sudden now shit's happening and it feels like we're going backwards. Well, it feels like we've been spinning our wheels, and it's hard not to get stubborn and just say, obviously this shit's not working. Fuck you, I'm not going to do it.
Right.
And so I think as much as anything, man, it's a blessing for us to be able to have this time to evaluate ourselves and use it as an opportunity to figure our shit out.
Right. I mean,
just be resilient, accept the facts, and try to keep moving forward.
Sure. Oh, this has been a constant reassessment, over and over, every couple of weeks, and then as you stay in the news and you see what happens elsewhere, and you see where that early resiliency within the community or within the state itself was advantageous to us. You know what I mean? It's easier to see, and it kind of lightens a load. But now, as things start to open up more, of course, it's going to be something we continue to deal with moving forward. Now, how do we? Of course, everybody's sick of it, but how do you adapt? How do you reassess once again, yet again? And it is difficult when the information that we get from people, the higher sources, isn't consistent. And that shit gets frustrating. Because you don't really know where to turn, but that's what do you do? Do you look to learn and understand, or do you just push and fight against it? Cross your arms. You know what I mean? So, in assessing you know, on an individual level, and then moving out on a
Yeah.
community level, business level, all these other things. That is going to lead us to whether we move forward or move backwards in the whole situation.
Absolutely. We got here from Alex. I'm telling everyone, just put the damn mask on. I need concerts back on.
Right?
All right,
Me
yeah,
too,
man. I feel that.
Me too.
I feel that. So if you guys aren't gonna do it for anyone else, do it for Alex Slurry so we can go out and see a band sometime this summer. I think an interesting challenge. I don't do this much, but a challenge I'd like to leave the audience with is try the approach assessment. Is the first word out of your mouth, is it yes or is it no? And how do you feel after that fact? How does your approach affect the conversation and affect whether you feel like you're being resilient or you're being stubborn? And I'd be super, super curious to know how that works out for everybody.
Yeah,
you know?
absolutely. Absolutely. I'll keep that in mind. I want to thank you
No,
guys.
I'm not going to do that.
No, I'm going to try.
I guess, yeah, sure.
But thank you guys for tuning in once again. We'll be back in another,
Probably another couple weeks.
weeks. Yeah, keep it just like that.
Yeah, it seems like this has been working well for us lately. You know, we were hammering it every single week and
Yeah.
trying to be resilient and understand that wasn't working for us coming out of the pandemic. And you guys are always amazing. You know, we appreciate the live views, everybody tuning in. Alex always throwing us some comments and engaging. We always appreciate that, brother. If you guys are watching on YouTube, thank you so much. Hope you enjoy it. We always have a good conversation, man, and I always feel new.
A little bit later.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
All right, so take care of yourselves, and we'll catch up with you next time.
sounds good.